Hello friends and welcome back to the Jank Diver Gaming channel. Today we're taking to the streets with our Streets of New Capenna Peasant Cube update. This cube got a lot of love in terms of pushed commons and uncommons from the set, but we do want to preface things by addressing the 4/4 Rhino in the room. New Capenna is ultimately a 3-color set, and while there's still plenty of monocolor action to be found, the focus on 3-color cards really dampens its impact on our personal cube. Someone somewhere will make good use of the awesome gold cards in this set, but aside from one exception that I'll bring up at the end of the review, 3-color cards really clash with our design goals and philosophies, so don't expect to see much in terms of multicolor inclusions. Still, there are some incredible additions to the Peasant Cube that we'll be discussing today. Real quick, before we get into individual cards, if you could do us a favor and whack that subscription button to stay up to date on more videos like this, it would mean a lot. Additionally, if you want to come test the cube for yourself, we'll have links to our Discord server in the description down below. Alright, we've got business to take care of. Let's get to it. It seems appropriate to start things off with one of the big head scratchers of the set. Inspiring Overseer is one of the standout commons, and while the distinction between common and uncommon hardly matters for our cube, it's still undeniable how pushed this is at the common rarity. If designs like this are any indication of what we can expect from commons in future sets, the Peasant Cube's got a lot to look forward to. I don't really need to spell things out here, but I guess I'm making this video, so I will anyway. We picked up Priest of Ancient Lore less than a year ago, and my take on that card was that people were less excited about the card itself and more intrigued by what it indicated about the direction White seemed to be headed in. Now we're here with a strictly better version with no rarity bump, and we couldn't be happier. Here's a recipe for success if you're trying to make a great Magic card. Take an already good or passable card like Priest of Ancient Lore and tack Flying onto it, and boom! That's how power creep works, y'all. I think most people will see that this is just a fantastic addition to our environment. Patch Up is a new card with a familiar effect, given that we've had a lot of experience playing Call of the Death Dweller. On average, it's probably a slightly worse effect since you're probably getting the same suite of creatures back, except without the bonus Death Touch and Menace counters that you'd get from Call. However, there is a higher ceiling with the Dream scenario of getting back 3 1-drops. Call of the Death Dweller's best case scenario was returning a 1-drop and a 2-drop with it, and we found that to be a little inconsistent due to the small number of black 1-drops in the cube. White has 2 times as many 1-drops, so we expect the average case of 1-drop plus 2-drop to crop up more often than not, with the less frequent achievement of returning triple 1-drops being a cool story moment for our players. When discussing our update, it seemed like the team all agreed that Mage's Attendant would be a good addition to the cube, but it also sounded like I was much higher on the wizard token it produces than the others. Not that anyone was complaining, but a creature with an onboard force spike is much more annoying for spell-based decks than it reads on paper. I should probably mention here too that Azorius has taken a fundamental shift away from a streamlined blue-white flyers deck, and we're trying to repurpose it into more of a value-oriented blank deck. I won't get into our reasoning behind that here, but what this means is that ETBs are even more valuable than before, and cards like Mage's Attendant that spit out tokens on ETB have a more significant role to play. This is, of course, all without going back to basics and recognizing that you're getting 4/3 worth of stats for 3 mana across 2 bodies, which is already an above average starting rate for creatures in this cube. Blue's going to be picking up a pair of casualty spells, which can be a little awkward given that our blue section isn't primed to be sacrificing creatures for value. Still, the 2 spells we picked out are at face value good enough without casualty that it's really just extra upside. Make Disappear is actually just a strict improvement over Quench, and while we're not directly cutting Quench to make room for it, if Quench is borderline enough to continue seeing play, then obviously Make Disappear makes the cut. No one's over the moon about it, given that we don't really anticipate you'll be copying the spell that often, but it's added functionality that Quench doesn't have, so even though it's a small improvement, it's an improvement nonetheless. The glaring weaknesses of counterspells like Quench are that they drop off in the late game and they're fairly easy to play around, but they do get the job done as an early game counterspell. Make Disappear takes a step in the right direction by covering up a little bit of that weakness by letting you trade out a creature you don't need to essentially guarantee you counter something you can't allow to resolve. This one's kind of the opposite of Make Disappear. The counterspell is functional without Casualty, but you won't intend to copy it often. With a little chat, you're actively trying to pull off the Casualty copy since it'll dig deeper and offer more card selection. Think of it like a blue version of Village Rites, which has been great, but bear in mind that blue creatures tend to be less expendable than black ones. That being said, a little chat is a great way to blank an opposing removal spell by casualtying in response and putting yourself up on cards the same way you would with Village Rites. The fact that you can always fire it off as a weaker cantrip is fine too, although you're probably a bit disappointed if that's how you plan on using it. You might have noticed we just skipped the black section, but black didn't receive any updates from new Capenna, although if you stick around to the end of the video, I'm going to go over a few cards we discussed that ultimately didn't make the cut, including a few black cards that you might see later on down the road. Red's in much the same boat, with Unlucky Witness being the only card we landed on for the update. I'll bet people put this in their Boros or Gruul decks from time to time, but we really see it as a secret Rakdos gold card, since you want to be able to control when it dies via sacrificing it to another effect. You get a little bit of time-sensitive card selection when it dies, and you only ever get one of the exiled cards, but we're not asking for much more from a 1-drop. Green did alright here with Elegant Entourage as our first of 2 creatures we picked up. We've seen the formula of 4/4 and green for 4 mana many times now, and at one point our entire Simic game plan was focused on ramping these sorts of creatures out on turn 3. Simic has since further solidified itself as a ramp deck with better threats worth ramping into higher up on the curve, but you'll still play a few of these mid-range threats from time to time, not to mention that Gruul is still actively interested in them. Entourage can't pump itself, but throws around buffs and trample to your other creatures whenever a creature hits your board. In a way, it reads like a tokens payoff, but I think just triggering this once a turn will be an effective way to push damage for any green-based mid-range deck. Being a single green pip is also a nice plus, since many of these sorts of creatures come with double green mana costs. As with Inspiring Overseer, Jewel Thief is pushing into mind-blowing common territory. Jewel Thief takes the tried and true 3/3 for 3 to the next level, taking on a few extra evergreen abilities and spotting you a treasure for literally no added cost. It's a head scratcher for sure, but we're running with it, and we expect it'll be a solid mid-range threat while also accelerating you to your 5-drop play. Most of our green 3-drops are doing specific jobs, whether that's for the counters deck or serving as outs to artifacts and enchantments, but Jewel Thief is just a generic, well-statted threat that I imagine could easily make its way into any green deck. Even Simic, which isn't as interested in 3/3 beaters for 3, can make use of the body while also playing into its primary ramp game plan thanks to the treasure. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with the push state of some of these commons this time around, but that's good news for the cube. Rounding out our new additions, we have the only gold card from the set that we've decided to try out, as well as a first for the Peasant cube. Lagrella the Magpie is the first 3-color card to take a slot in the cube, but we have some specific reasons for giving Lagrella a shot. First off, I personally like the card, and I mean I like it a lot, enough so to advocate for testing the card despite its color restrictions. I'm just a huge sucker for blink effects, and this design is a cool cross-section between temporary removal and blink enabler. Second, and perhaps more importantly, Lagrella signals a theme, which is what we like our 3-color cards to do if we're going to play them. I've already mentioned how we're shifting blue-white into a more blink-oriented deck, and Lagrella plays into that strategy perfectly, despite requiring green mana to cast. As of the making of this update video, I've trophied a cube draft centered on this card, and I can report that the card is absolutely busted, so it's probably for the best that it's difficult to cast. Still, it signals the blink deck, it's insanely fun to play, and it even lends itself to some creative deck choices and deck construction given how well it plays with ETB effects outside the intended blue-white spectrum. This card puts Bant Blink on the map almost single-handedly, but we expect it'll be a light splash in blue-white decks more often. So one question I often get from these update videos is why we didn't include certain cards, especially ones that seem tailor-made for the Peasant cube. Rest assured, we usually discuss basically anything of worth when it comes to our updates, so we usually have a reason for excluding cards that you might otherwise expect to see. I figured it might be a good idea to actually go over some of those real quick, in no particular order, and you can let me know if you'd like me to continue doing this in future update videos. I guess the most obvious card to get out of the way would be Strangle. This inspiring Overseer and Jewel Thief complete the trifecta of new Capenna commons that read like uncommons, but Strangle's biggest strength is also its biggest weakness. Maybe we're overthinking it a bit, but it's perhaps a bit too efficient for the environment that we've cultivated, especially at a time where red decks are at their best and Is It Spells decks are top tier. Strangle has been gated a little bit. It's sorcery, it can't hit players, but still, it trades up for such a huge swath of creatures that it feels like it could do more harm than good. Too many efficient answers like this, and you run the risk of pushing out too many creatures higher up on the curve that can't contend with this sort of efficiency. I mean, Strangle literally trades up for a number of 4 and even 5 mana cards in the list, and while a Lightning Strike variant is just as capable of taking those creatures down, there's a big difference between 1 and 2 mana. Again, that's the line of reasoning that led us to hold back on Strangle, so let us know how you feel about it, and we'll reevaluate over time as the power level of the cube continues to increase. Rob the Archives is certainly a little less controversial than Strangle, and while we gathered some opinions on the card, we ultimately decided it's too much setup for this style of effect. Unlike previous iterations like Reckless Impulse and Light Up the Stage, Rob the Archives only gives you until the end of the turn you cast it to play the exiled cards, which means it's completely dead on turn 2, and likely not effective until at least turn 4 or later. Impulse and Stage both give you an extra turn to cast your cards, meaning you can invest mana into the spell one turn and free up your mana the following turn to get full value from the card. Casualty hardly helps the card, as it increases the number of cards you get to look at and potentially play, but does nothing to make the card more accessible earlier in the game. I'm sure there are turns where Rob the Archives looks like an explosive card advantage tool, but I think it's generally outclassed by the versions we already have. Dusk Mangler was one of the black cards we were initially looking at that we took a pass on. The cube isn't super friendly towards 7 mana creatures if you're intending to cast them outside of dedicated control or ramp decks, so while the combination of effects reads as pretty powerful, it doesn't feel like the decks that want this effect are going to be able to effectively cast the card. That means it's best viewed as a Reanimator style creature, where it circumvents the additional cost but still punishes the opponent, and Reanimation is a sub-theme in this cube that works just fine in Dimir shells, but even then, we can't dedicate too many slots to creatures we don't intend for our players to cast. Reanimator decks already have some powerful creatures to bring back, and I don't know that we're hurting for another. I could see this cracking the 450 list, but in our Streamline 360 card list, it misses out. I'll admit that Nightclubber is one of the cards we passed on that probably deserves a second look, and I'll likely advocate for including this card soon. Our initial take was that the cube doesn't really need another sweeper effect in black. For reference, we're currently running 2 Infest variants at 360 cards, and that's felt like a good ratio. So, while I believe it is true that we've got a good handle on black sweepers, it's not like Nightclubber is really breaking the status quo. -2/-2 sweepers are good tools to keep aggro decks in line, and while -1/-1 effects can do that as well, there are tons of decks from Orzhov's Sacrifice to Golgari Recursion decks that just happen to be packing token generating effects, and Nightclubber feels like it stacks up well against them without shutting out aggro. For what it's worth, we've tried Plague Mare in the past to middling effect, and Nightclubber looked like Plague Mare 2.0. It's pretty meaningfully better though, since it loses the obnoxious white creature hate clause, and the option to blitz makes it easier to cast and replaces itself. Sweeping the board of all 1 toughness creatures while cantripping, and even getting a hit in for 2, that's a pretty nice set of abilities. Pretty unexciting, truth be told, but we chatted about Riveteer's Requisitioner for a little bit, ultimately deciding that our other similar cards are probably just better. Rimrock Knight, Voltaic Visionary, and Hobgoblin Captain all fit the 2 mana 3/1 in red description, with the Requisitioner not adding much to the formula outside of leaving a treasure behind. It's not that that's completely useless, but it's also not a better upside than the potential first strike from Hobby Captain or Rimrock's Adventure Half. Blitz is upside too, but it's a bit pricey for what you get, and we just got through talking about how every deck seems to produce X1 tokens on board, so it's not getting a clean, hasty attack in that often. I'm sure we could move these game pieces around and be satisfied no matter the outcome, but it seemed like an unnecessary move given how lukewarm everyone was on the Requisitioner. Let the bodies hit the floor. Let the bodies Next up is Body Dropper, a card I raised for consideration as it reads like a fine role player for Rakdos sacrifice decks. As with Ravenous Squirrel, it's a sacrifice payoff that grows while you're incidentally doing the thing your deck wants to do, and has the activated ability to do the thing itself, even if picking up Menace for a turn isn't usually worth throwing away a body. While it would be a fine card to test out, and I wouldn't look twice at someone else trying it in their cube, for us it's edged out by the Rakdos cards we're already playing, and doesn't bring anything new to the table worth replacing the cards we know work for the section. Last on the list is Citizen's Crowbar, a new living weapon style equipment in the same vein as Ancestral Blade or Barbed Spike, with the added twist that you can cash in the equipment down the road to pop an artifact or enchantment. While we're always on the lookout for good disenchants that still serve as main deckable cards, we've actually hit a nice enough density of these sorts of effects that we're not in desperate need of another. Between Cathar Commando and Banishing Slash, we actually snagged some good interaction for enchantments in white, and the equipment half of Citizen's Crowbar is a smidge too expensive at 2 to equip, so it's not that impressive as a standalone card. If we're ever on the search for more disenchants, or if we ever explore an equipment sub-theme, we'll likely take a second look at the Crowbar, but for now, we'll leave it on the sidelines. And that's all we've got for the update. Let me reiterate that there are tons of awesome cubable cards at the Peasant level here, but the 3-color nature of the set just doesn't lend itself well to our cube goals, and that's perfectly fine. We'll have plenty more to look forward to with the upcoming Alchemy release and whatever the Baldur's Gate digital companion piece ends up looking like. For now, we get a small Peasant update with some banger commons and even our very first 3-color addition to the card pool. As always, you can draft the cube with us and offer your feedback in our Discord channel listed down below in the description. You can subscribe to the channel for more update videos like this, including the unrestricted update for new Capenna, and you can find our more extensive evaluations of these cards on our podcast, also linked down below. Alright, thanks for spending your time here as always. My name's Timothy with Jank Diver Gaming, and I'll see you all next time.